This is the France 24 debate. The situation in Egypt coming to a head. We're talking about it with our guests. Joining us from Tahrir Square, correspondent Kathryn STAPLEY, from Luxor, Abdul Mawgoud Dardari of the Muslim Brotherhood-backed Freedom and Justice Party, supporter of the opposition Egyptian author Myra DARIDAN. Welcome back, and welcome back to public relations consultant Arnaud, and from London, Algerian-born attorney Saad DJEBBAR, who's been monitoring the situation throughout North Africa since the Arab uprisings began, and some 2.5 years ago. Now, since the weekend's mass demonstrations in Egypt, little had been heard from Mohamed Morsi until very late on Tuesday, when he tweeted ahead of a midnight speech on television.
The January 25th revolution will achieve all of its objectives. The price can be my life, my own life. I am willing to safeguard and protect your lives.
Abdul Mawgoud Dardari, we heard some of the panelists mention in part one of our discussion how the important thing going forth is to try to build coalitions, to try to include everyone. Did Mohamed Morsi fail in that?
Yes, let me please, before I talk about building coalition, make two comments. Number one, I am very surprised that so many media, Western media outlets that interviewed me today and yesterday, almost happy that there is a coup d'etat in Egypt. It is really sad. It goes along the ideals of Western Europe. Number two is the person who made the translation for the speech made serious mistakes. The president was talking about legitimacy, that he is the legitimate leader. So let me put these two aside. Now for building coalition, from day one, after the end of the ex-regime, the military regime, it was a military regime that the people of Egypt went to the streets against. And I'm really surprised that the respected Egyptian youth, I watched a YouTube video of Ms. DARIDAN just a year ago condemning military control of Egypt. I don't know what happened, why it changed. From day one, we really wanted to make coalition. In fact, we started suggesting to the different political forces that let us have a democratic coalition that brings us all together, and even suggested we all go into election against the forces of the old regime. But to our surprise, that was rejected. We still kept the Democratic Alliance, about 17 parties together, and we really wanted, every time we wanted to work together, even the Constituent Assembly. It was full of all different parts of the Egyptian society. The secular had to work out only 2 weeks after they wrote almost 95% of the Constitution. So we really wanted to welcome others. And look at the Egyptian government. No more than 30% of the government are members of the Muslim Brotherhood. We are very much into bringing different people together, because Egypt does not belong to the Muslim Brotherhood alone. There are so many different groups, and the challenge, we really understood this from the very beginning, the challenge for all of us as Egyptians is to work together, not to welcome a military coup d'etat, not to welcome another dictatorship, because we don't like what President Morsi does. And that is something that makes my mind baffling, because it's strange. How can any Egyptian welcome dictatorship, welcome the military, welcome the police state again in Egypt? Dear Egyptian friends, let us not go this way. It is dangerous. We've tried it many times. It didn't work. Let us focus on democracy. Democracy does come with some pain. Let us take the pain and let us work together and remove President Morsi in 3 years. But we keep the principle. Only those who come in democracy can live in democracy.
Okay, let me respond. And since we are accusing media to translate badly, etc., I can tell you that in Arabic. الإخوان المسلمين actually are صم بكم لا يتفهمون. You just rejected any discussion, sir. Not you personally. I have nothing against you. The Constituent Assembly, when the people said, listen to us or our presence is useless, they actually had to walk out, and still the the Constitution went on. So don't tell me that you listened to anybody. And yes, a year ago or more than a year ago, I did say يسقط يسقط حكم العسكر, and I shall say it again.
Which means,
If there is a military coup that wants to install a military government that will stay months and months, I shall go to the streets and say down with a military dictatorship. But we're not talking of that today, sir.
And you're not worried?
We are talking...
You said in part one of our discussion that you would like to see some kind of a...
We are talking of the army, and the army is my cousin. It is your nephew. It is everybody part of the Egyptian field. We're not talking of the rule of the military. And this is where you're wrong, because you have just said in the first part that me as an Egyptian, I shouldn't say this and that. This is what we've been hearing for a year. You as an Egyptian shouldn't do this. You as a Muslim shouldn't do this. You are not the only ones to know what we Egyptians should or should not do. So, I'm sorry, I've taken the parole for a long time, but we needed to let you understand this. There's no way you're going to create enemies of each Egyptian. And this is what you've done.
Arnaud Castaignet, how do you build a coalition? You just heard heated discussion here. Is it possible in Egypt to have a broad coalition? In part one of our discussion, Saad DJEBBAR was mentioning how in Tunisia, drawing up the constitution, you did get Islamists and people who were liberals and seculars to work together. It was painful. There's been political assassinations in Tunisia. Can it be possible in Egypt?
Well, Tunisia is a very good example because you have an Islamist party who managed to build a coalition with the CPR, kind of center-left political party, and with Etakatol, who was a social democrat political party. So I think, especially after an authoritarian era, and especially when you get 51% of the votes, democracy and legitimacy is not only about being elected, only about having a better score. It's about having balance of powers and having a legitimate government, including all of the population. So I think the lack of desire that of Morsi to build an inclusive government is one of the things that people are blaming him for. So yeah, he should have tried to do everything in order to build a right coalition between all of the political landscape of Egypt.
All right, two tweets to show you. First from Blessing Iniesta. Coup is the wrong word to use. Egyptians are commemorating the post-Mubarak era so that if Morsi isn't confident, he'll leave. That's somebody who I guess is in favor of an eventual takeover of the situation. While Elf JC says, you may like it or not, but it is a coup. The same with Mubarak. The people acts, but the army is the arbiter. And that, he says, is dangerous. Now, Egypt, a nation of 85 million, the standoff playing out, just to remind you, not just in Cairo, in most major cities, there have been some violent moments, especially in the Nile Delta. There have been the offices of the Muslim Brotherhood attacked in several places. In Cairo itself, there have been several key hotspots over the last few days, several key hotspots and rallying points. Overnight, one rallying point turned ugly on the outskirts of the campus of the University of Cairo, the same where Barack Obama gave his big speech on Middle East policy back in 2009. 16 killed, more than 200 injured, shots fired. Kathryn STAPLEY, again, we're looking at the breaking news that's coming in, and word that there's barbed wire being put around the compound where Mohamed Morsi was said to have been. Word that the army's been deployed to several neighborhoods of the capital this Wednesday. The army's ability, I guess, to prevent more bloodshed is going to be an important factor.
Yeah, I mean, that's that's really the Tamarrud campaign, the rebel campaign, issued a statement earlier on today, and they have asked the army to come down onto the streets, really to protect civilians, because there are huge fears that there will be bloodshed here. If you go into, even in my neighborhood, people are very scared. People have bought weapons to protect themselves. They fear that whatever happens, if President Mohamed Morsi's government is ousted, then there will be some backlash. There'll be some backlash from the Muslim Brothers. Now, of course, we don't know this is what will happen, but I must stress here that the Muslim Brotherhood's Freedom and Justice Party have always maintained that the people have the right to peaceful protest, and the Muslim Brotherhood itself renounced violence a long time ago. Now, also, we do know that the army, as I was mentioning earlier, are heading up to these pro-Mohamed Morsi demonstrations out in Cairo University and at the Rabaa al-Adawiyya Mosque in Nasser City. Now, whether that's to protect them or to stop them from leaving and ending up in clashes with people, I think that this is what's going on. The army are trying to secure Cairo here before they make this statement.
All right, and we're watching this. By the way, a statement coming out of Washington now, quoted by the French news agency AFP. Not enough propositions in the speech by Mohamed Morsi, who earlier in the day said that power sharing could be on the agenda. On Monday in Tanzania, Barack Obama warned Egypt's president that democracy is about more than elections. On Tuesday, the U.S. Secretary of State echoed that statement when he spoke with his Egyptian counterpart.
He reiterated what he said, what the president and others have said publicly, that the U.S. is committed to the democratic process in Egypt and does not support any single party or group. He stressed as well that democracy is about more than just elections. It's also about ensuring the voices of all Egyptians are heard.
Abdul Mawgoud Dardari, your reaction to the statements out of Washington?
I couldn't hear you. Can you repeat the question, please?
What's your reaction to the statements out of Washington about how democracy is about more than just elections?
I expect Washington and the European centers of power to condemn any coup d'etat in Egypt. That is dangerous for their interests, that is dangerous for their ideals, and that is dangerous for the lives and the human rights of the Egyptian people. We need not to hold the stick from the middle and to play diplomacy when human rights violations are coming to millions of Egyptian people. Coup d'etat should condemn it, and democracy should be the only way. And let me, if I may, comment a little bit on my Egyptian colleague insulting me in Arabic, but did not, Ms. DARIDAN, I'm sorry, I couldn't get your name. Insulting me in Arabic, but not translating it in English. And let me tell you, so that you can understand the level of discourse for political difference. She called me deaf, dumb, and blind. That is not acceptable in a political discussion.
No.
Look at what happens in Tahrir Square now. The human rights organizations are talking about hundreds cases of sexual harassment and rapes for women in Tahrir Square. That is not Egypt. That is not what Egyptians want to see. And also concerning the constitution, I will ask my Egyptian counterpart, do you respect the will of the Egyptian people? The Egyptian people went to the voting and 2/3 of them accepted the constitution. So this is what we're talking about. We as Egyptians need to change our mindset with democracy. Democracy, there are competing forces, and those competing forces go to the ballot box. Those who win welcome those who lose and work together for the benefit of Egypt. But to have the military intervene, the military is dictatorship. It's not democracy. And let us not regret what we're talking about.
Myra DARIDAN, I want you to react on that issue to a statement that another statement that came out of Washington. The U.S. has rules about suspending aid if there is a coup d'état. A State Department spokesperson quoted as saying there are conditions on aid, but quote, that's way ahead of where we are in the process.
I would say that we have seen what happened with the International Monetary Fund. They're not helping Egypt until they are secure, which is understandable. I mean, you do not lend money to somebody.
But should the U.S. be suspending aid if, those are the rules, if there is a military man in charge of whatever happens
Have they
next?
suspended the aid when the SCAF was on board? I don't think so. But anyway, this is their decision. I'm not talking for the Americans. I'm talking for the Egyptians. And therefore, I'm responding to Mr. DARDERY and telling him, I did not call you a liar. I would never call you a liar. I said, لا تتفهمون, which in Arabic means you do not understand. It's not lying. As for the vote for the Constitution, sir, I voted here in France and I saw the voting bulletins. Well, as by miracle, they were the exact opposite of the bulletins that you voted for in Egypt, i.e. the yes was a no, the no was a yes. And as there was a color code, just in case people used the color code, it was photocopied in black and white. So people who could not understand, who could not read and write, who could not see the color, could not vote.
Right,
is this what you call democracy?
You're second guessing
This is all faulty.
The constitutional referendum. Now,
faulty.
We're talking about the army stepping in when there's an Islamist government in power. Now, there was a precedent of 2 decades ago. What started in Algeria as student protests led to mass demonstrations. That was in 1988. 4 years later, multi-party elections. But after the first round, when the Islamists looked set to win a landslide, the army stepped in and declared a state of emergency. Saad DJEBBAR, what followed were the so-called blood years, as many as 200,000 killed in a decade-long Algerian civil war. Would you say that's a cautionary tale Egyptians should pay attention to, or is this a completely different case?
I think if the Egyptian army are effectively intervening, they should know the following, that they were in power since 1952, and what is happening today, or 3 or 2 years ago in Egypt, it is the result of governing by the army, which always led to dictatorship. In Algeria, the best example is Algeria. When the army intervened in 1992, although the elections were not that important like in Egypt, because it's a presidential system in both countries, the Islamists won the parliamentary elections, and they would have no significant role in terms of decision-making process on big issues. And look, 20 years later, Algeria had the highest now level of corruption in its history. Algeria has gone back, 20 years backwards. The Algerian economy without gas and petrol would have been like Somalia. And most importantly, although the army promised that and promised the people that they stop the Islamists because they want to protect democracy, until now Algeria is not a democratic state until further notice. And the only difference now...
So what you're saying in effect is that, are you suggesting that that's an argument for keeping President Morsi in his seat?
What I'm saying is the context and the framework has changed. Now we are in the epoch of the masses going against dictators. If you look at President Ben Ali in Tunisia, he lived off living on the fear, promoting the fear that the Islamists will be replacing me and you will end up without stability. The same thing Mubarak played this card, and even in Syria they are playing that card. Now, the best way to trust the army if they took over in Egypt is to make sure that there is a constitution similar to that one which was established after the Second World War in Germany, in Italy, and in Japan. Proportional representation in terms of elections, parliamentary system, and to make sure that no one will claim monopoly over power or the truth or religion or history except through a democratic constitution.
All right.
And the Islamists have to learn the lesson there, because the Islamists and the dictatorships, they played on that polarization. And I think that's, unfortunately, which I wished the Muslim brothers learned from their history and the current history. You don't need to go to history books. Look how the Islamists were oppressed in Egypt for so many years because of this fear. So the army should not in Egypt go back to 1952. That was a big mistake in their history. They should make way as soon as possible for a transition, genuine transition, and not to manipulate and play one against the other like in Algeria.
Sorry, so a rewrite of the Constitution is what you're saying. On Twitter, viewers saying that, well, democracy in itself is a work in progress. Tokugawa saying Egypt tumult expected since 2011, overthrow of Mubarak. The French Revolution took 10 years and Napoleon to stabilize. Could argue that, by the way, that democracy took a lot longer to come to France. China, 6 years, Iran 2. Egypt, question mark. Well, we have lots of question marks. We also have James Creedon of our Media Buzz segment. James, how are you?
Evening, Francois. Good.
The story unfolds each day. One of the big differences I've noticed since the beginning of 2011 now is that everybody's savvy now. There isn't anyone caught off guard when it comes to the coverage of what's going on and the reporting of it on social networks.
That's right. Well, I mean, there's a steady stream of information coming out online, and I'll show you that first, but I'll show you then some of the criticism of the coverage on Twitter, and indeed the Western mainstream media coverage as well. So you have photos such as this one, which are very impressive. I suppose this gentleman trying to give an impression of solidarity and unity despite everything that's going on. You're seeing lots of this sort of stuff coming up online, the celebratory aspect of what seems to be the end of Morsi's rule. That timer, which got an awful lot of news coverage, which a lot of news channels were even opening their bulletins with, of course, went down to zero, and a lot of people having a little bit of fun with it, bringing in some, I suppose, popular culture, the 24 News show, Longest Day of His Life, etc., etc. So that's all quite flippant, I suppose, given the nature of the news. So let's take a look at a little bit of impressions of what people are saying on social media. Dear world, Egypt witnessed the largest turnout of protesters in its history demanding Morsi steps down. This is not a coup, it's the people's will. So we're seeing a lot of discussion of that use of the term coup d'etat, a lot of people disputing the use of that term. Also, democracy, the fact that he was democratically elected.
That's the French foreign minister tweeting.
That's right. And I think
saying that the president was democratically elected.
So clearly a concern about the precedent being set when somebody who was at least, in inverted commas, democratically elected is being moved to one side. It's not something
that tweet is from this Wednesday. That's from today.
That's from today. That's Laurent Fabius. And elsewhere, very worrying and scary pictures. Some people tweeting photos. I wonder, are they actually exaggerating the real risk of violence? But that is something that is being discussed on social media as well. Shadi Hamid, who is an analyst at the Brookings Doha Institute, a new generation of Islamists will say, we tried democracy and this is what we got, and they will blame the US for letting it happen. So a lot of analysts such as Shadi Hamid giving their impression of what the way forward will be and what the outcome of all of this will be. One aspect which I thought was quite interesting online as well today, François, some criticism of the Western media coverage. Now, this is a blog called Jadalia, and what this blogger is basically saying is that it was presented in the last number of days, in particularly on the 30th, which was Sunday, right? I'm getting my days mixed up.
No, you're right. That was the anniversary of Morsi's inauguration.
And in many media, it was being presented as a polarization. The anti-Morsi and pro-Morsi demonstrators were sort of maybe balancing each other out. And then quickly there was a turnaround and people were saying, oh, actually, the anti-Morsi demonstrations are considerably larger, maybe the biggest demonstrations in the history of the country. So that was one criticism. Also, the coup d'etat.
Criticism is saying that
the media were getting it wrong, that they were presenting this as some sort of 50-50 dynamic, and it was actually not, that the anti-Morsi protesters, according to this blogger, were always more numerous. Also, the coup d'etat discourse is being presented here as something that is quite misleading, that there are a lot of nuances to the conflict, and it's also not, I suppose, giving enough, it's neglecting the people's agency. In other words, the people, through their protesting, shaping the political outcomes. So he is essentially saying that it's not just a case of Islamists versus the military. The people have a big part to play in all of this, and that's being neglected in some of the media coverage.
And of course, we're going to see as well, in Egypt, we've discussed since the start of the week how sometimes the numbers can be a little bit inflated by both sides. We saw it over the weekend. It's true that there is a mass turnout. We saw it on Tahrir Square. We saw it in Nasr City, where the Islamists are as well. Question is, what will the silent majority do? And of course, and I want to thank our panel for joining us for this discussion, we are going to be keeping close tabs throughout here on France 24 as we wait on news of Egypt's head of the army, the defense minister. What's he going to say now that this ultimatum to Egypt's various political forces to come to some kind of a consensus solution has indeed expired? Stay with us. You're watching Nice One Again.